They said she killed a child with her touch, but the only thing dying in Ashwood Hollow was the truth. The rope burn circled Mercy Callahan's throat like a necklace of sin, raw, weeping, the color of old blood mixed with prairie dust. She could still feel the hemp fibers biting into her windpipe, still taste the iron tang of her own scream swallowed back. 3 days passed. They'd dragged her from the trading post cellar, where she'd worked honest since her mother's fever took her. 3 days since Widow Pritchard's boy stopped breathing in his sleep, and the town needed a witch to burn. They hadn't burned her. Not yet. But they'd tried the rope. The wind came down off the northern ridges, mean and bitter, carrying the smell of coming snow and the distant howl of something hungry. November in the Montana territories didn't forgive, and Mercy had nothing left to barter for mercy of any kind. Her dress, once blue calico, now the color of mud and shame, hung torn at the shoulder where Deputy Farrow had grabbed her. Her feet bled through the thin leather of her work boots. Each step away from Ashwood Hollow left a small dark print in the frost-hard earth. They'd voted on it in the saloon while she hung choking from the oak tree in the square, toes scraping dirt, vision going white, then black, then red. 12 men and 4 women, and not a single hand raised in her defense. Even Farrow, who'd once smiled at her over the counter when she sold him tobacco, had pulled the rope tight with his deputy's star-catching lamplight. It was Tom Riggins who'd cut her down. Old Tom with his twisted leg and his reputation for drinking more than thinking. He'd stumbled out of the saloon, seen her swinging, and sawed through the rope with his skinning knife while the others were still casting votes. She'd fallen like a stone, vomited into the dirt, and Tom had leaned down close enough she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Git," he'd said. Just that. They changed their minds. I can't stop 'em twice. So she'd run. Stumbled east into the hills, away from the sunset, away from the only town she'd ever known. Now the light was failing again, and the cold was settling into her bones like an old acquaintance. The land stretched out vast and indifferent, rolling prairie giving way to pine-thick foothills, every shadow deep enough to hide a bear or a man. Her fingers had gone numb. She tucked them under her arms as she walked, but the threadbare cotton offered no warmth. The rope throbbed with each heartbeat, and she wondered distantly if the wound would fester, wondered if she'd live long enough for it to matter. The child, Jacob Pritchard, 8 years old with his mother's red hair and his father's weak lungs, had simply stopped breathing. Mercy had been there, yes, spooning broth into his mouth because his mother was 3 days drunk on laudanum and grief. The boy had smiled at her, had said the broth was good, had closed his eyes and never opened them again. By morning, Widow Pritchard was screaming about witchcraft and dark touches, and the girl with the strange eyes. Mercy's eyes, one green and one hazel. The mark her mother said was a blessing, but the town always whispered was something else. Strange how quick a whisper becomes a shout when folks need someone to blame. The first snow began to fall as true dark settled. Mercy looked up at the sky, that vast bruised purple of winter dusk, and felt the fight start to leak out of her. She'd walked maybe 12 miles. Not enough. If they came for her in the morning, they'd find her frozen. She crested a low rise and stopped. Below sat a small wooden structure. Single room, stone chimney, windows like dark eyes. A schoolhouse, or had been once. The door hung crooked on leather hinges, and half the roof shingles were missing. But it was 4 walls, and maybe a place the wind couldn't reach. Mercy glanced back. Nothing but her own blood spots in the snow and empty land. No torches, no voices. Just the wind and the coming storm, and the terrible freedom of having nothing left to lose. She walked down toward the schoolhouse. The door groaned open. Inside smelled of old wood and mouse nests and abandonment. But it was shelter. In the corner, someone had left firewood years ago, gray with age but dry. A rusted stove squatted near the chimney. Mercy's hands shook so badly, it took 3 tries to gather kindling. She had no matches, no flint, nothing but her own stubborn refusal to die easy. She pulled the small Bible from her pocket, the only thing she'd kept. She tore out a page, then another. Genesis. The paper caught spark when she struck it against the stove's rough edge, again and again, until finally, a small flame. She fed it carefully, paper, then twigs, then larger pieces, until the fire took hold. Heat bloomed. Mercy huddled close, her body shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Only then did she cry. Quiet tears that tracked clean lines through the dirt on her face. Not for herself. For Jacob. For her mother. For the small life she'd believed might let her belong. The fire crackled. Outside, the snow fell heavier, covering her tracks. Mercy unwound the torn petticoat strip from her throat. The cloth came away stained with blood. She looked at the wound by firelight. A perfect circle of broken skin, raw and honest as any brand. They'd marked her. Whether she lived or died, she'd carry this. She pulled her knees to her chest and watched the flames, thinking about fire and how it refuses to apologize for burning. Somewhere in the dark, a wolf called out. Mercy closed her eyes and tried to remember how to pray. The fire whispered secrets only the desperate could hear. And in the morning, someone would come, not to save her, but because the land had its own laws, and some debts got paid in ways the town would never understand. Dawn came gray and cold, and with it, the sound of a horse that shouldn't have been there. Mercy woke to the creak of leather and the low snort of an animal outside. Her hand went instinctively to her throat, fingers finding the rope burn before her mind fully surfaced from sleep. The fire had died to embers. Frost painted the inside of the broken windows in delicate patterns that would have been beautiful if she wasn't so damned cold. She stayed perfectly still, listening. A man's voice, low and rough, talking to his horse the way some men do when they've been alone too long. Boots on frozen ground, the metallic click of a rifle being checked. Mercy's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked around the schoolhouse for a weapon, anything, but there was only old wood and her own used-up body. The door was the only way out, and whoever was outside stood between her and it. The footsteps stopped at the threshold. "I know you're in there," the man said. His voice carried the weight of tobacco and exhaustion. "Saw the smoke last night. Figured someone was foolish enough to hole up here." Mercy pressed herself against the wall beside the stove, making her body as small as possible. Her damaged throat wouldn't let her scream, even if she wanted to. "Ain't here to hurt you," the voice continued. "But you got about 3 hours before a storm comes through that'll bury this whole valley. You plan on freezing? That's your business. But I got coffee heating, and you look like you could use some." The door swung open slowly. Morning light spilled in, and with it came the man. He was tall, maybe 40, with a face that had seen weather and worse. gray threaded through dark hair that hung past his collar. He wore a Union cavalry coat, faded blue and patched at the elbows, and his right hand rested easy on the revolver at his hip. Not threatening, just aware. His eyes found her immediately, swept over her torn dress and bare feet, and the livid mark around her throat, and something in his expression went hard. "Jesus," he said quietly. Mercy tried to speak, but her voice came out as a broken rasp that made her wince. The man held up his free hand, palm out. Don't try to talk." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him taking inventory. The rope burn, the blood on her boots, the desperate animal fear in her eyes. "They do that to you? The town?" She managed a small nod. His jaw tightened. He glanced back outside, then stepped fully into the schoolhouse and pushed the door closed behind him. "Name's Dalton Pierce. Used to run cattle up near the Canadian line before the winter of '83 killed most of my herd. Now I just, move around, trap some, hunt some, mind my own business." He paused. "But I saw what they tried to do to you." Mercy's eyes widened. He'd been there, in Ashwood Hollow? "I was passing through 3 days back," Dalton said, as if reading her question. "Saw them drag you out. Saw the rope." His hand moved to his coat pocket and pulled out a small tin. "Saw that drunk fool cut you down too, and figured you'd run east. Only place to run in November." He opened the tin. Salve, from the smell of it. Sage and animal fat and something else she couldn't name. He took a step closer, moving slow, like she was a spooked horse. "This'll help the wound. Keep it from going septic." Another step. "I ain't gonna hurt you. You've got my word, for what that's worth." Mercy watched him, trying to measure the truth in his face. Men lied, men smiled, and voted for your hanging. But this man's eyes held something different. Not kindness exactly, but a recognition. Like he knew what it cost to survive when the world wanted you dead. She nodded again, barely. Dalton knelt down in front of her, keeping distance between them, and held out the tin. "You can do it yourself if you want. Or I can help. Your choice." Her hands were shaking too badly to manage it. She looked at him, then down at the tin, then back at his face. Finally, she tilted her chin up, exposing the wound. He worked careful and quick, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as he applied the salve to the rope burn. The medicine stung at first, then went cool and numbing. Mercy's eyes watered, but she didn't pull away. "They said you killed a child," Dalton said quietly, not looking at her face, focused on his work. "I heard the widows screaming it in the street. Heard what they called you." Mercy's breath hitched. "I also heard," he continued, "that the boy's father died in a mine collapse 6 months back. Heard the widow's been drinking laudanum like water since. Heard the boy was sick, real sick, and probably dying anyway." He finished with the salve and sat back on his heels. "Heard a lot of things. None of 'em made you sound like a killer." He stood and walked to the door, opened it. His horse stood patient in the snow, saddlebags bulging. Dalton pulled out a canteen and a wrapped bundle, brought them back inside. "Eat," he said, handing her the bundle, dried meat, and hard biscuit. "Then we need to talk about what happens next." Mercy took the food with trembling hands. She wanted to ask why he was helping her. Wanted to know what he wanted in return. Wanted to understand why a stranger would risk himself for a girl marked as a witch. But her throat wouldn't let her ask, and maybe it didn't matter anyway. Dalton stood by the window, looking out at the coming storm. "They'll come looking eventually," he said. "When the snow clears. Town like that, they don't like loose ends." He glanced back at her. "Question is, you gonna be here when they do?" He'd seen her hanging. He'd followed her trail. But was he salvation or just another kind of trap? Outside, the wind picked up, and Mercy understood that survival sometimes meant trusting the very thing that terrified you most. Trust was a luxury neither of them could afford, but the storm didn't care about their hesitation. The wind hit like a fist an hour after Dalton arrived, turning the world outside the schoolhouse into a white howl that swallowed everything. Snow came sideways through the gaps in the roof, piling in small drifts along the eastern wall. Dalton had moved his horse into the schoolhouse, a big roan gelding with patient eyes, and the animal's warmth helped fill the small space with something almost like comfort. Mercy sat near the stove, the salve on her throat already working its strange magic. The pain had dulled to a bearable ache, and she could swallow without wanting to scream. She watched Dalton move around the room with the efficiency of a man used to making camps in hard places. He'd reinforced the door with a length of timber, hung his bedroll in the driest corner, set his rifle within easy reach, but not pointed at her. Small considerations, the kind that spoke louder than words. He'd given her his extra shirt, rough wool that smelled of wood smoke, and horse, and she'd pulled it over her torn dress, grateful for the warmth. Her feet were wrapped in strips of cloth, torn from his spare blanket. She knew these were gifts she couldn't repay, knew that every kindness was a debt, but she was too tired and too broken to care about the mathematics of survival. "Storm'll blow through by tomorrow night," Dalton said, feeding the fire. "But the drifts'll be deep. Take another day before the trail's passable." He glanced at her. "You got people? Anywhere you can go?" Mercy shook her head. The motion pulled at her throat wound, making her wince. "No family? No friends who'd take you in?" Another shake. Her mother was dead. Her father, whoever he'd been, had left before Mercy could form memories. And Ashwood Hollow had been the only home she'd known. The trading post, the small room she'd rented above the general store, the Sunday services, where she'd sat in the back and kept her strange eyes downcast. All of it was gone now, burned away like morning frost under an angry sun. Dalton was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I had a daughter once," he finally said. "She'd be about your age now. 17, 18, maybe." Mercy looked at him, surprised. His voice had gone soft, distant. "Cholera took her when she was 6, he continued. "Took my wife, too, same summer. We were camped near Fort Benton, and the sickness came through like God's own judgment." He picked up a stick, poked at the coals. "Preacher said it was the Lord's will. Said we should accept it as part of his plan." His jaw worked. "I buried them both in ground so hard I broke 2 shovels. Then I took that preacher's Bible and burned it in their grave fire." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. "Point is," Dalton said, looking at her now, "I know what it's like when the world decides you're disposable. When folks who claim to speak for God decide your pain don't matter as much as their comfort." He tapped the stick against the stove. "So when I saw them hang you, or tried to, I couldn't just ride past. Maybe that makes me a fool. But I've been a fool for worse reasons." Mercy reached for the small slate that had been left in the schoolhouse, probably from when it actually taught children. She found a piece of chalk, barely more than a nub, and wrote in careful letters, "Why help me?" Dalton read it, then smiled, a sad, worn expression. Because somebody should have helped my Sarah, should have helped my wife, and nobody did. He stood, walked to the window. And because I saw your eyes when they put that rope on you. You weren't guilty. Guilty people got a look. I seen enough of them during the war to know. You were just scared and confused, like a kid who couldn't understand why the adults had stopped making sense. Outside, the storm screamed against the walls. Inside, the fire crackled, and the horse shifted its weight, and something fragile was being built between two people who'd lost their faith in building anything. Mercy wrote again, "What they'll do to you if they find you helped me?" "Probably nothing good," Dalton admitted. "But I've been shot at, stabbed, nearly froze to death twice, and watched everything I loved die in front of me. I ain't scared of a town full of cowards who hang girls for having different colored eyes." He reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in old cloth. When he unfolded it, Mercy saw the rope. The actual rope they'd used to hang her. He'd cut it from the tree, she realized, kept it. "Found this after you ran," he said. "Figured it was evidence, proof of what they'd done." He held it up to the firelight, and Mercy could see the dark stains on the hemp, her blood, her skin. "Question is, what do we do with it?" Mercy stared at the rope, her stomach turning. That thing had been around her throat, had tried to kill her, was trying to kill her still, in memory, every time she closed her eyes. She took the chalk and wrote, "Burn it." Dalton nodded slowly. "That was going to be my suggestion." He moved to the stove, opened the iron door. The flames leaped and danced, hungry. Some things need to be destroyed. Some things don't deserve to exist. He held the rope over the fire, then paused. "You want to do it? Might help, letting it go yourself." Mercy stood on shaking legs, walked to the stove, took the rope from his hands. The hemp felt rough and hateful against her palms, and for a moment she was back in the town square, choking, dying, watching the faces of people she'd known her whole life turn away. Then she threw it into the fire. The rope caught immediately, sending up a plume of black smoke that smelled of tar and death. It writhed in the flames like a living thing, twisting and blackening, and Mercy watched it die with a satisfaction that scared her a little. She'd never wanted to destroy something before, never felt this sharp pleasure in watching pain return to its source. "Good," Dalton said quietly. "That's good." They stood together watching the rope turn to ash, and when it was finally gone, nothing but carbon and memory. Mercy felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness, not peace, but a small, fierce satisfaction. The mark on her throat would remain. The scar would be permanent, but the rope itself was gone, unmade, returned to smoke, and nothing. Dalton closed the stove door. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we figure out what comes next." Mercy nodded. She lay down near the fire, pulling his wool shirt tight around her, and closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 days, she slept without dreaming of hanging. The rope was gone, but the question remained. What good was surviving if you had nowhere to survive to? Morning would bring choices, and Mercy was learning that sometimes the hardest choice was simply deciding you were worth the trouble of saving. The storm broke on the second morning, and with the silence came riders, 5 of them, dark shapes against the white hills. Mercy saw them first. She'd been standing at the broken window, watching dawn paint the snow in shades of pink and gold, when the riders crested the far ridge. Her breath caught. She turned to Dalton, who was saddling his horse, and pointed with a shaking hand. He moved to the window, looked out, and his face went hard as stone. Damn. He counted them silently. 5. That's Deputy Farrow's bay in front. The others I don't recognize, but they're carrying rifles. He glanced at Mercy. They tracked you. Snow probably helped. Your trail would have been clear before the storm hit. Mercy's hand went to her throat. The wound had started to heal under Dalton's salve, but now it throbbed with phantom pain, remembering. Get behind the stove, Dalton said quietly. Stay low. Don't make a sound. She shook her head, wrote quickly on the slate. They'll kill you. Maybe. He checked his revolver, then his rifle. But I ain't letting them take you. He looked at her, and his eyes were calm. Not the calm of peace, but of a man who'd made his choice and settled into it. I told you. I'm done watching innocent people die because cruel folks need someone to blame. The riders were closer now, moving careful through the deep snow. Mercy could see their breath steaming, see the set of their shoulders. They weren't coming to talk. Dalton positioned himself by the door, rifle ready. When I was in the war, he said conversationally, like they had all the time in the world, I learned that most men don't actually want to kill. They just want to believe they're righteous. You take away that belief, sometimes they'll turn around and go home. The horses stopped 30 yards out. Deputy Farrow dismounted, his star catching the morning light. He cupped his hands around his mouth. Dalton Pierce, we know you're in there. Dalton didn't answer. We got no quarrel with you, Farrow called. Just send out the girl and ride on. Nobody needs to get hurt. Except her, Dalton muttered. Then louder, she ain't done nothing wrong. She's a witch and a murderer. Another voice. Mercy recognized it as Samuel Cord, who owned the dry goods store. She killed the Pritchard boy with her devil's touch. Town voted legal and proper. Town voted to murder a child, Dalton shouted back. That ain't legal. That's just cowardice with a quorum. There was muttering among the riders. One of them, a younger man Mercy didn't recognize, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Last chance, Pierce. Farrow's hand moved to his gun. We're authorized by the town council to retrieve her, dead or alive. You protecting her makes you complicit. Then I guess I'm complicit, Dalton said. He raised his rifle, sighted down the barrel. First man through that door gets a bullet. Your choice how this goes. The standoff held. Mercy could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the cold air leaking through the gaps in the walls, could taste fear like copper on her tongue. 5 men against 1. The mathematics weren't good. Then a sound broke the silence, small, high, unexpected. A child's voice. Pa, stop! Everyone froze. Mercy looked past the riders and saw what she'd missed before. A small figure on a pony, maybe 9 years old, bundled in 2 large coat and mittens. The boy kicked his pony forward, pushing past the mounted men. Toby, get back, Farrow barked. But the boy, Toby Farrow, the deputy's youngest son, rode right up to the schoolhouse and stopped. He looked up at his father with something fierce and stubborn in his young face. Pa, you said lying was a sin. You said it every Sunday. Boy, this ain't the time. Miss Mercy didn't kill Jacob Pritchard. Toby's voice cracked with emotion. I was there. I saw him playing that morning, and he was already sick. He couldn't breathe right. And Miss Mercy was the only one who tried to help him when his ma was too drunk to get out of bed. The writers shifted. One of them, Samuel Cord, looked uncomfortable. Jacob was my friend, Toby continued, tears streaming down his face now. And you're lying about what killed him because you're too scared to tell Widow Pritchard the truth, that her drinking killed her husband with distraction in the mine, and it killed her boy with neglect. Toby, that's enough! Pharaoh's face had gone red. No, Pa, it ain't enough. The boy was crying openly now, but his voice didn't waver. You taught me right from wrong. You taught me the Bible says, thou shalt not bear false witness. And that's what you're doing. All of you. He looked at each writer in turn. Miss Mercy never hurt nobody. She was the only one who was kind to Jacob when everyone else pretended not to notice he was dying. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Pharaoh stared at his son, his face working through a dozen emotions. Shame warred with anger, and both lost to something that looked like grief. He looked at the other men, then back at the schoolhouse, then down at his hands on his reins. He's right, said the young writer Mercy didn't recognize. His voice was quiet but clear. I was at the Pritchard house last week. The boy was coughing blood. Doc Morrison said it was consumption, that he wouldn't last the winter. He looked at Pharaoh. We all knew it. We just didn't want to admit it. Samuel Cord removed his hat, ran a hand through his thinning hair. Lord forgive me, he muttered. What have we done? Pharaoh sat frozen in his saddle. Finally, he looked up at the schoolhouse. Pierce, the girl, she really innocent? As the day is long, Dalton called back, and you knew it. You all did. The deputy's shoulders sagged. He looked at his son, at the tears freezing on the boy's cheeks, and something broke in him. We can't take her back, he said finally. Town'll still want blood. Widow Pritchard's got too much influence, and folks have already committed to the story. Then you ride back and tell them she's gone, Dalton said. Tell them she froze in the storm. Tell them whatever you need to tell them, but you leave her be. Pharaoh nodded slowly. He looked at his men. We didn't find nobody. Storm must have taken her. That's what we're reporting. One by one, the riders nodded agreement. Thank you, Pa, Toby whispered. The deputy reached down and gripped his son's shoulder. You're a better man than me, boy. Don't forget that. He raised his voice. Pierce, we're leaving, but you get her far from here. Canada, maybe, or California. She can't ever come back. Understood, Dalton said. The riders turned their horses and began the slow ride back through the snow. Only Toby lingered, looking at the schoolhouse. I'm sorry, Miss Mercy, he called out. I'm sorry we didn't help you. Mercy stepped into the doorway, into the light where the boy could see her. She touched her throat, where the rope burn was healing, then placed her hand over her heart. Thank you, the gesture said. Thank you for being brave. Toby nodded, wiped his eyes, and turned his pony to follow his father. One child's truth had broken the spell of a town's lie. But some freedoms come with the price of exile, and Mercy was learning that survival and belonging were two different countries entirely. They said a person couldn't grow roots in frozen ground, but Mercy Callahan was about to prove them wrong. 3 months passed before Mercy spoke again. Her voice came back slow and broken, like water finding new channels through rock. The first word was thank. Whispered to Dalton one morning when he brought her coffee in the cabin he'd helped her claim. An abandoned trapper's shack 15 miles north of the schoolhouse, deep enough in the wilderness that Ashwood Hollow felt like a bad dream from someone else's life. "Don't thank me yet," he'd said, but his eyes had gone soft around the edges. "Winter ain't over." But they'd survived the winter, barely. Dalton had stayed longer than he'd intended, teaching her to trap and hunt, to read the weather, to survive alone. He never touched her except to tend her wound or steady her when the snow was deep. Never asked for anything except her company at the fire, and sometimes her opinion on which direction to ride come spring. "I ain't stayin'," he'd told her more than once. "I'm a wanderer. It's all I know how to be anymore." Mercy had nodded, understanding. Some people were meant to root, and some were meant to drift. She didn't begrudge him his nature. But when the thaw came in early March, and Dalton finally packed his saddlebags, Mercy had walked with him to where his horse stood waiting. Her throat had healed enough that she could speak in a hoarse whisper, though it hurt and probably always would. "You saved my life," she managed, each word careful and deliberate. "You saved your own life," Dalton corrected. "You walked 12 miles in the snow with a crushed throat. You made fire from nothing. I just pointed you toward tomorrow." She'd reached up then and touched his face, a brief, gentle gesture that said more than her damaged voice could manage. "If you're ever done wandering," she whispered, "there's coffee here." He'd smiled, touched the brim of his hat, and ridden north without looking back. She'd watched until he was a dark speck against the mountains, then turned back to the cabin and the life she'd have to build from scratch. That was spring. Now it was September, and Mercy stood in the garden she'd planted behind the cabin, surveying what she'd grown. Potatoes, mostly, some carrots, a patch of beans that had done better than expected, herbs her mother had taught her about, sage and yarrow and nettle. Not much, but enough. Proof that she could take dead ground and make it live. Proof that she could survive not just winter, but the seasons after, when survival turned into actual living. Her hands were calloused now, dirt permanently under her nails. Her hair had grown long, and she kept it tied back with a strip of leather. The rope burn around her throat had scarred into a pale ring, visible but healed, a permanent reminder that she'd been marked for death and chosen life instead. She heard the horse before she saw it. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle she kept near the garden fence, but she relaxed when she recognized the rider. Toby Farrow sat astride his pony, bigger now than he'd been in November, almost grown into the coat that had swallowed him during the standoff. He raised his hand in greeting, cautious but friendly. Mercy set down the rifle and waited. The boy dismounted, walked closer. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Miss Mercy," he said, "I hope it's all right I came. I didn't tell nobody. Pa thinks I'm fishing up at Miller's Creek." "It's all right," Mercy said. Her voice was still rough, still whisper-thin, but it worked. "How'd you find me?" "Tracked Mr. Pierce's trail after the thaw," Toby admitted. "Wanted to make sure you were okay. Wanted to—" He looked at his boots. "Wanted to say sorry again. For not speaking up sooner. For letting them hurt you." "You spoke up when it mattered," Mercy said gently. "That took more courage than most grown men have." Toby looked up at her, and she saw tears threatening. "Jacob was my best friend, and I knew he was sick. We all did. But it was easier to blame you than to blame his ma for drinking, or God for making him weak, or just the way things are sometimes. People need someone to blame when they're scared, Mercy said. She gestured to the garden. I learned that. And I learned that the only way to survive it is to go somewhere they can't reach you and grow something they can't kill. The boy looked at the garden, at the neat rows and the obvious care, at the evidence of hard work and harder hope. You did it, he said quietly. You made a life. I'm trying, Mercy corrected. Some days are harder than others. Toby reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. I brought you something. It ain't much, but he handed it to her. Mercy unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a smooth river stone, flat and palm-sized, with words carved into its surface in careful letters. Mercy Callahan, innocent, 1885. I made it, Toby said. Took me 2 months to get the letters right. I thought maybe you'd want proof. Something that says what really happened. So even if everybody else forgets or lies about it, there's this. Truth carved in stone. Mercy's eyes burned. She held the stone in both hands, feeling its weight, its permanence. Thank you, she whispered. This means more than you know. There's more, Toby said. Pa's been different since that day. Quieter. Thinking more. He made the town council officially declare the hanging was a mistake. Said it was done under duress and false testimony. They got it written in the records now. And Widow Pritchard, she left town. Went to live with her sister in Colorado. I think she knew, deep down. I think the guilt was eating her alive. Mercy nodded slowly. She didn't feel triumph or vindication, just a tired kind of relief. The truth wouldn't bring Jacob back, wouldn't undo the rope or the fear or the exile. But it was something, a small correction in the ledger of the world. You can come back if you want, Toby said. Pa said so. Said your welcomes in Ashwood Hollow, that folks would make amends. Mercy looked at him, this brave boy who'd spoken truth when silence would have been easier, and felt a surge of affection for him. But she shook her head. This is my home now, she said. Out here, I don't have to be careful. Don't have to hide my eyes or apologize for existing. Out here, I can just be. Toby nodded like he understood. Will you be all right? Alone? I've been alone before, Mercy said, and I'm learning it's different than being lonely. She looked at her garden, at the cabin, at the mountains rising blue and eternal in the distance. I got food, got shelter, got work to do. That's enough for now. The boy mounted his pony, but before he left, he looked back at her. You're the bravest person I know, Miss Mercy. Braver than any soldier or gunfighter, because you survived when the whole world wanted you dead, and you did it without hating everybody after. I'm working on the not hating part, Mercy admitted. Some days are better than others. Toby smiled, touched his hat the way he'd seen his father do, and rode back toward town. Mercy stood in her garden holding the stone with her name carved into it, proof of her innocence, proof of her existence. She thought about Dalton, somewhere north, still drifting. Thought about Jacob Pritchard, who'd never gotten to grow up. Thought about all the people wrongly condemned, wrongly marked, wrongly erased from the story, because truth was too uncomfortable to face. Then she knelt in the dirt and dug a small hole at the corner of her garden. She placed the stone there and buried it halfway, so just the carved words showed above the earth. A marker, a testament, something that would outlast her and the lies both. She stood, brushed dirt from her hands, and looked at what she'd built. The garden would need harvesting soon. The cabin roof would need patching before winter. There was endless work ahead, the kind of work that kept you too busy to dwell on what you'd lost. But in the quiet moments, in the early mornings when mist rose off the mountains, or in the evenings when the stars crowded the sky like witnesses, Mercy allowed herself to remember, to feel the rope burn's ghost ache and know she'd survived, to understand that survival itself was a kind of defiance, that living well when they'd wanted her dead was the deepest revenge she could take. The scar would never fade. The memory would never fully heal. But the garden grew anyway, persistent and patient, turning poison soil into sustenance through nothing but time and refusal to quit. And maybe, Mercy thought, that was all any of us could do. Grow something beautiful in the place they tried to bury us. They say the old trapper's cabin still stands in the Montana hills. And if you look close at the northeast corner of the garden plot, you'll find a stone half buried in the earth. The letters are worn now, but you can still read them if you know to look. Mercy Callahan, innocent. Some truths get buried. Some survive. Which ones we choose to remember? That's the question every campfire asks, and every generation has to answer. The fire crackles, the story ends, but the land remembers, and the garden still grows. If this story moved you, don't let the campfire die. Subscribe to keep these raw, untold folk tales alive. Stories of survival, defiance, and the quiet courage history tried to bury. New legends drop every week. Hit that subscribe button and become part of the circle. Because some stories deserve to be remembered, and some voices refuse to stay silent. The next tale is waiting. Will you be there to hear it?